Good evening. Well, the students in the other parts of the world that'll be hearing these tapes soon will have to know that I wasn't talking to myself. This is a very, I don't know if I can use that, very. This is a unique evening. Unique. It can't ever happen again. Likewise, it is important. On this night, the work that was given me to do in 1959 will be completed. There will be a few lectures in Chicago next week, public lectures, but they will not contain anything that is not incorporated in the work which you have heard and which is incorporated in the work you have been given for study. The months spent at home after the voice told us to go there and wait for this message were fruitful in that they gave me this message to take out for 9 months. The 9 months won't come to an end until after the Los Angeles, Portland, and Seattle work, but the work of 1959 and the message given me to deliver will have been delivered when we leave here tonight. Those of you with a background of understanding, a background of the Infinite Way books, the monthly letters, and the tapes, have recognized the fact that this message of 1959 has been given to you in an entirely different way than ever before, and that it has evolved in such a manner that it makes it more simple for you now to sum it up and to practice it. You have for study any or all of the tapes which have been made in 1959. You have more especially to help you in your healing work the letters of June, September, October, and November 1959, which were especially brought out to be a part of, or rather a help in, your study of the 1959 work, in the healing work, and to give you a foundation for the new book, The Art of Spiritual Healing. You will recognize in this book a new note, not a new principle, but a new note. And you will find more clearly stated than ever before the principles which must be embodied in your treatments to enable you to bring out good healing work and to form the foundation for a healing consciousness. Now, let me repeat, since this is the last opportunity this year I will have to tell it to you, let me repeat that there never has been and there never will be a message, a healing message, that will enable anyone to heal. There is no such thing as the letter of truth that will heal anybody or reform anybody or make them over. The function of a message, the function of the letter of truth, is to provide the principles which, as they are incorporated into your consciousness, enable you to release yourself from material sense and evolve spiritual consciousness. And it is spiritual consciousness that heals. It is either the natural spiritual consciousness that some few mystics have, as my own healing work was started, without any knowledge of truth, just by virtue of having received that mystical experience which enabled me to have the experience described by the Master, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, and I am ordained to heal the sick." Those that have this experience can heal if they never know the truth, but as a rule they lose their healing power within a few years. And it was this very thought that drove me into the study that resulted in my discovery of meditation, and thereby gave me access to the inner realm where the secrets of healing could be revealed. Now, be assured, as I said before, that if faith would heal anyone, then out of 100,000 people who have faith enough to make the trip from all over the world to Lourdes, there would be more than 15 people healed. And the records show that only 15 people out of 100,000 receive their healing. Therefore, faith is not the factor in healing. As a matter of fact, Dr. Carell, in investigating those 15 who were healed, reveals that there was one thing in common with all of them, not that they had faith, but they did not pray for themselves, they prayed for others. So there was another factor beyond faith. Spiritual healing is accomplished through either the natural or the developed spiritual consciousness of an individual. And spiritual consciousness is your or my individual consciousness when we no longer turn to a God for healing, when we no longer believe that there is a God withholding healing, and by virtue of turning to someone or something, God is going to do for us what God wasn't doing yesterday. It is only in proportion as you know that there are not two powers in the world, that there is not a power of evil that requires a power of God, that you develop spiritual consciousness. Spiritual consciousness is shown forth by the Master when he says to the cripple, "What did hinder you?" Or when he says to the blind man, "Open your eyes," or when he says to Lazarus, "Come forth." In none of those cases did he say, "I will pray to God for you, and my God will do this for you." No, he asks, "What did hinder you?" In other words, even as he said to Pilate, "Thou couldst have no power over me unless it were given to thee of God." And yet he knew the temporal power of Pilate, but he called it no power. so does the individual of spiritual consciousness know that germs and infection and contagion, heredity, and all the rest of these medical laws, well do they know that these physical and mental laws are temporal power, but through spiritual consciousness they have perceived that temporal power is not power. It is the arm of flesh or nothingness, or as you have received it here all of this week, it is nothing but the belief in two powers. You have had it brought to your attention forcibly this week that there is no such thing as human consciousness or human mind. You have seen clearly that you cannot claim God as divine mind or God as divine consciousness and then turn around and say there is a human consciousness or a mortal consciousness. Actually, that which is called the human mind or human consciousness is a belief in two powers. It isn't a mind and it isn't a consciousness. It is a belief in two powers. And in proportion as you can lose your belief in two powers, you no longer have a human mind or human consciousness. It is the divine mind or divine consciousness now expressing itself as yours. And this is the meaning of the Master statement, have that mind in you which was also in Christ Jesus. In other words, have that mind which does not believe in two powers, but which recognizes there is no such thing as power. Not even good power. Not even God power. If you are to use the word power at all, you may use it only in the sense that God is the creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle of all being. But you may never use the word power, even good power, as meaning one power over another power. Now, all religions, every religion on the face of the globe, has made itself impotent because it has accepted God and devil as being opponents or opposites, as warring with each other, which never has been true, which isn't true now, and never will be. That which you call devil, that which you call a negative power, that which you call evil, must be understood as an impersonal power due only to a belief in two powers, but in and of itself no power. Nothing is good or bad. Nothing is good or bad. It's only your thinking so, or the universal belief in it, that makes it so. Actually, there cannot be an infinite God and an opponent of God. There cannot be an infinite God and that which wars with God, and certainly there cannot be an evil condition over which God has no control, or in which you have to in some way bribe God to get him to use his influence to wipe out the disease. Now, just as this work of 1959 has a specific purpose, so we must go back to find why. Everyone who comes to this work comes either from Christian Science, from unity, or from New Thought. That is a perfectly natural thing. In the beginning of this work, we had no publishers, and I published our writings. And having no ambition in the line of wanting numbers or followers, they were not advertised. And I was perfectly satisfied to have those find our work who, in God's own way, were led to us, without going out to them, without seeking them. And so, not only there was no advertising, there was no promotion, there was no organization, but I never went anywhere to give this message unless I were invited. Never have I asked anyone for the privilege of speaking, never have I gone anywhere to speak unless I was invited there. And therefore, the message of the infinite way moved in a small circle, mostly made up of metaphysicians of one school or another. That was true in this country, and it was true in the beginning in the foreign countries. These students, as they read the message of the infinite way or heard it, didn't think to clear their minds of what they knew, to see what message was being presented to them, but rather they read the writings with a view to inwardly comparing it with what they already knew. In many cases, when it didn't, they pointed out to me how wrong I was. Now, this is a perfectly natural thing. Don't think for a moment that I'm criticizing or judging anyone. This is a natural thing. We read something, we hear something, and immediately we go back into our mind to see how it shapes up with what we already know. And then we find points of similarity, or, as in this case, we read words like God, mind, principle, treatment, prayer, and then we say, ah, yes, well, that's just like this message or that message. They have the same words in them. And it is for this reason that so few students ever really understood the message of the infinite way. Now, this same mistake is responsible for the failure of church religions of every denomination in all times throughout history. The reason why religion today, especially church religion, has to be brought up to date because Jesus Christ was a Hebrew rabbi preaching in the synagogues, the people thought he was teaching Judaism. And they heard him through those ears. They never stopped to think that the God of Jesus Christ has no relationship whatsoever to the God of the Old Testament. That Jesus did not teach that God punishes and God rewards. Jesus did not teach that you have to live your Saturday life in a synagogue. Jesus did not teach that you have to tithe and sacrifice and wear sackcloth and ashes. Jesus did not teach that, he didn't teach the Hebrew faith or its theology. On the contrary, in his greatest teaching he said, "Ye have heard it said of old, but I say unto you." And he wiped out what you have heard of old. And he gave us something so entirely new, so entirely different, that somebody should have heard his voice. No wonder he had to say, do you have ears and do not hear? Do you have eyes and do not see? And finally, O Jerusalem, I would, but ye would not. No wonder. No wonder. He was trying to introduce them to another kingdom, which he called my kingdom. And he said, my kingdom is not of this world that you've been accustomed to. My peace I give you, but not the peace that this world gives you. This is another dimension of life. This is a new kingdom. Don't worry about those 10 commandments. Wipe out 9 of them. Just keep one. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul. And to that, let us take one out of Leviticus. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And then leave that 9 commandments alone. But with no ears to hear and no eyes to see, you know what happened? They took the whole 10 commandments and brought them over and called them Christian teaching. They weren't Christian, they were Hebrew. And not only that, they weren't even the new Hebrew teaching of Jesus Christ. So did he wipe out worshiping in holy temples. So did he wipe out worshiping in holy mountains. So did he wipe out this devotion to ceremony and ritual and creed. So did he wipe out baptism with a suffer it to be so now, but let's not see any of it perhaps 2,000 years from now. So did he stop this fasting. So did he stop all of this business and get right down to cases and say, love thy neighbor as thyself, resist not evil, no revenge, no getting back at your enemies. No getting back at your enemies, I say to you, forgive your enemies 70 times 7. Not only don't pray to God as the Hebrews do, dear Lord, destroy my enemies, but pray for your enemies. That must have been a strange message to the Hebrews' ears, so strange they never heard it. But unfortunately, the church heard it, only they didn't hear it as he gave it. They heard it as if he was saying what ye have heard of old, and they brought it right along and formed their new church with the old teaching, which should have been discarded. There are some Hebrew prophets in the Old Testament, and there are some really worthwhile principles in there. And those few passages could well have been taken over into the new and not fool the world into believing that all of those old Hebraic teachings were going to set you spiritually free. Now, that isn't any different than our experience when, in presenting these infinite way principles, instead of being heard, what I heard mostly was, yes, this is exactly what I was taught in this teaching or that teaching or the other teaching, regardless of how many times it contradicted it. So it was that we were given this 1959 work for these specific purposes, or for the specific purpose of showing you so clearly that you never again can forget it, and if you do, thank heaven it's recorded on tape, that you are to, if you wish to follow this message of the infinite way, you are to follow these principles of life so that you also may develop the spiritual consciousness and live spiritually, not so that it is said to you it's impractical in this modern age, but rather This is the most practical way of living there is. Now you know that we have hundreds upon hundreds, I can say thousands of students who have proven the practicality of this message, not only in physical, mental, moral, and financial healings, but in whole ways of rebuilt lives. You have witnessed it now, as you have heard, in its operation in mental institutes, in work with corporations and unions. You have witnessed it on the larger scales in which it has been worked, and so you must know that there is nothing more practical in the world than living the spiritual life. Believe me, if you want to make friends and influence them, live the spiritual life and watch what a tremendous influence you will be in their lives and how they will be influenced to go and do likewise. You will not need to influence anyone to do things for you, because once you have touched the spiritual life, you will not need man whose breath is in his nostril. You will have access to the source of life, the divine consciousness which is yours. Once you have agreed that you will no longer hate, fear, or love that which is called the evil powers of the world. Once you have attained a consciousness which will enable you to say, what did hinder you? Pick up your bed and walk. Once you obtain the consciousness that will enable you to respond without fear when you are told that there is grippe, flu, epidemics, storms, depressions, diseases of one nature or another, and prove by your state of consciousness that these are not power, never were, never indeed can be power, that they only exist as temporal power while you are giving power to them. Now, this week you have had revealed to you a mode of spiritual healing practice. I repeat, you will find these principles in short form in the letters June, September, October, November. You will find them clearly stated in the new book, The Art of Spiritual Healing. What is more, the art of spiritual healing has been presented in such a way that if you know of anyone interested in the subject of spiritual healing with any kind of a background, regardless of the school of metaphysics, you will find that they will understand this book and that they soon will be able to demonstrate it. Also, if you know anyone turning to a metaphysical or spiritual way of life, you will find that the art of meditation and practicing the presence will lead them gently into this activity. Now, some years ago, one of those miracles took place that we call an act of God, that a metaphysical teacher here sent a copy of The Infinite Way to Henry Thomas Hamblin in England. And when Mr. Hamblin read it, he said, "This is what I have been waiting for, and this is what the world is waiting for. This is the teaching of Jesus Christ on earth again." And he wrote an article called The Infinite Way and published it in his magazine. The result of that article was so tremendous throughout England, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, that George Allen and Unwin, one of the outstanding publishing houses of England, asked for permission to publish it in a British edition. They did, and in less than a year they asked for the next manuscript, which was Living the Infinite Way, and since then they have published The Art of Meditation and now The Art of Spiritual Healing. But this opened a whole new field, because for the first time we had a publisher who had access to bookstores. You remember I told you that up to this time we had access only to those with some metaphysical understanding who recommended it to each other. But now a new field opened to us, people who go into bookstores looking for something to bring them up out of wherever it is that they may be. And so, with that as a start, we found ourselves having to explain metaphysical truth or metaphysical healing, and then the spiritual wisdom of the message, to those with no background of it. And so a way began to unfold to lead these students from where they were to where they wanted to be. And it was in that way that the art of meditation and practicing the presence came into being. Then, of course, here in New York, Harper and Brothers were interested and first published The Art of Meditation, then Practicing the Presence, and now The Art of Spiritual Healing. And here too, again, we have access to bookstores, public libraries, seminaries. We have access to places which heretofore were closed to us. As a matter of fact, through this publication by Harper's, a review of The Art of Meditation was published in the Chicago Tribune, and that was seen by the man who is in charge or who selects the books for Protestants of all denominations in the United States, and he recommended The Art of Meditation for Protestants of all denominations, and this put the book into the Protestant churches and on their bookstalls. Naturally, when Harper's published the Practicing the Presence, that followed, and I already am informed that The Art of Spiritual Healing is following the first two books and bringing interest, so that not only from England to South Africa and across to Australia and New Zealand do we have a whole new interest in the metaphysical and mystical life, but now from Maine to California, in circles never before interested in this, we now have a tremendous interest in this, to the extent that ministers and bishops are sending out letters calling attention to these writings. And I also tell you that another recently published Harper book, evidently destined for the Episcopal Church, The Infinite Way, is recommended, The Art of Meditation is recommended, and all Infinite Way writings. Now, do you see why it is necessary that our Infinite Way students so thoroughly understand Infinite Way principles that first of all they can heal with them, then secondly, when these people without a background of understanding of this work ask, well, what is it? How does it work? That our students can answer. It isn't going to be enough to say, oh yes, the Infinite Way heals. That sort of gives the impression that we have some kind of a monopoly on God. He'll do for the Infinite Way what he isn't doing for the Baptist or the Episcopalian, and that isn't true. Every one of these principles will work for a Protestant, a Roman Catholic, an atheist, a Vedantist, a Hindu, a Muslim. And remember this, it has already gone to Japan where it is doing its work. So please know this, that God is no respecter of persons or of religions. The secret of this work is, do you know the principles? Do you know them well enough so that your consciousness has evolved to the place of spiritual consciousness? For when it is, you'll find that a spiritual consciousness in a Hebrew is the same as a spiritual consciousness in a Christian or a Muslim. There is only one spiritual consciousness, and that is the consciousness that knows there is only one power and does not battle against evil, does not war against negative powers. These principles must be thoroughly understood before your consciousness can evolve to the point of demonstrating them. You first accept them intellectually. As a matter of fact, if you read these books and they do not bring out a response in you, don't spend any more time on them, because they are evidently not meant for you. But if you feel some response in you to this message, then remember that you have reached the first rung. You have intellectually agreed that there must be something to this, or this is truth. But after that comes the study of these specific principles and the practice of them until they become so much a part of your consciousness that instead of sympathizing with disease, instead of criticizing and condemning sinners, you can approach these with the same attitude the Master did. To the sick, what did hinder you? Pick up your bed and walk. To the sinner, neither do I condemn thee. Not carrying over the old Judaic principles of stoning the sinners or putting them out of the synagogues, but forgiving them 70 times 7 until, whether it's the 487th, 488th, or 489th time, they will awaken. And if they haven't by then, you can rest in peace. You only have one more to go. Because he says they will awaken on the 490th. Now, we must never give the impression that the Infinite Way is something separate and apart from God or Christ or Buddha. We must never give the impression that we have found a way to get God to do for us what it won't do for an atheist. We must learn to make it clear that we are not setting up another religion, that we are not claiming anything of a special nature for ourselves, except that we have had revealed to us some ancient principles which operate in human consciousness without respect of person. This may come as news to some of you. I know it doesn't to all of you. That a man received a very fine healing in this work and came to us with an offer of $10 million to finance a television and radio program without commercials. I do not have to tell you that it was turned down, that it wasn't even a temptation to accept it. Firstly, because I had been invited on to a television program in Chicago, and in 1/2 hour program broke every record of the Chicago Tribune station. So that, to an extent, that they offered us a year with tremendous earnings. And of course, as you might know, presenting this name throughout the nation, of course that wasn't even considered either. And then we were offered $5 million to set up our headquarters in Santa Barbara, California, and to equip it. And this was turned down. We didn't even take time to meditate about it or to ask God what was His will. I took it for granted that I knew God's will. Now, there were two major reasons, and there may have been 1,000 minor ones, but we need deal only with the two major ones. The first one is that we have no intention of setting up any such thing as a religion or a teaching separate and apart from that which already exists. In presenting these writings and recordings in our monthly letter through the channels of writings published by responsible publishing houses, by the fact that now these are published in American editions, British editions, Dutch, German, and soon French, I feel confident that consciousness is opening to an awareness of these principles and the fruitage of it. But there is a second major reason, and that is this. Tell me what would happen if 10 million people tuned in and the next day said, "You said you could heal, now prove it." I suppose the temptation would be greater if I could say, well, now I have 1,000 students who know these principles so thoroughly that they heal like this. I might be tempted, but I'm not tempted now. So if you had any idea of making such offers, why, just save our time. But let me urge this on you. If publishers are going to continue publishing infinite way writings, if these books are going to be on public sale in bookstores and department stores, and as they are now gaining a wider circulation in metaphysical movements, if that is to continue at the same rate of our 1959 sales, then let me tell you that it won't be a question of my saying, "Won't you please study these?" Somebody's going to have to do it. We are already beyond the place where one man can handle it alone, even with the help of the few practitioners that I have. At this present moment, it takes me carrying a dictating machine with me with 2 secretaries spread wide apart to get the mail answered in one day, and sometimes even that isn't possible anymore, and it looks as if very soon there'll have to be a 3rd secretary. Now you just know that that is not the way it is meant to be, because there is a limit even to a 19-hour working day. And so, with the principles as they are being presented to you and to the metaphysical world and to the religious world in the form that they are, there is no excuse anymore for us not developing many, many hundred practitioners to care for the work that is now flooding in upon us. And I may say this to you, that those of our practitioners who are established in the work are in a similar position to mine. They no longer can find time to sleep, and that is not natural. All right. The principles aren't difficult. If you once can train yourself to read and hear with an unconditioned mind. Don't try to remember what you knew before, but listen to me when I tell you this. Healing has nothing to do with God. God is infinite omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience. God is the substance of all being. God is the law unto all being. God constitutes all being. The very Spirit of God is in you. Not only you, students of the Infinite Way, you in prison, in hospitals, in atheism, in whatnot. God constitutes your being, and God is performing His function in you without your reminding Him, without your bribing Him, without your asking Him. You need not pray to God for help. You need not ask God for healing. You need not turn to God. God is already in the midst of you. God already knoweth your needs, and it is His good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Seek not what you shall eat or what you shall drink, or wherewithal you shall be clothed, or whether you shall get rid of rheumatism or not. Leave all this alone, for God is functioning. Before Abraham was, God is functioning. And the promise is, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Why doubt it? So rest then. Rest in this, that God is, and that God is functioning. Now, after you have completed that part of your remembrance, your treatment, your meditation, call it prayer if you like, as long as you're not thinking of prayer as a going to God and expecting God to do something that God isn't already doing. When you have done that, then you are still faced with whatever the seeming problem is. Your recognition or realization of God and God's allness may not have resulted in healing or reformation or supply, or whatever the nature of your unfoldment may be. And therefore, you come to the first. It's our second principle, but it's the most important part of the principle that deals with our healing work, and it is this. Error isn't personal. Therefore, it has nothing to do with you, or with your patient, or with your student. And you need not try to improve your patient, or correct them, or psychologize him. Don't try to make him a better human being when you're trying to heal him. If he could be a human being, he'd be it without your help. Now, drop your patient, your disease, your sin from your thought while you realize that this problem that is confronting you is an effect. Now remember that. It is an effect. An effect of what? Wrong thinking? No. An effect of sin? No. An effect of heredity? No. An effect of something in your body? No. It is an effect of carnal mind, the belief in two powers. impersonalize your evil instantly. It helps me always, if I'm stuck with something that seems to be resisting my knowing of the truth, it helps me just to say, Paul made a terrible mistake. He said carnal mind was enmity against God, and that's the biggest mistake in the Bible. Carnal mind isn't enmity against God. God hasn't any enemies. God is infinite. The carnal mind is the impersonal source of evil, but it isn't a power. It is a belief in two powers, a universal belief in two powers which we, by virtue of having been born, we accept. Now, there is no such thing as a carnal mind. There is no such thing as a mortal mind. Not only that no surgeon will ever find one in you, but neither will a psychologist or a psychiatrist, nor will they ever be able to put their finger on one. There is no such thing as a carnal mind or a mortal mind. That which is termed carnal mind or mortal mind is a universal belief in two powers. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. We weren't human beings until Adam and Eve accepted two powers, good and evil. We were what we right now in our true being are. We were then and we are now the Christ, the spiritual Son of God, God the Father and God the Son, and we are God the Son. We are spiritual beings, one with God. But entertaining the belief in two powers, we are thrown out of the Garden of Eden, where we now have to earn our living by the sweat of our brow and suffer the sins and diseases of the flesh, none of which would be true if we could heal ourselves of this belief in two powers. And that's what healing amounts to. Healing ourselves first of the belief in two powers, and then by virtue of our having been healed, heal others. Physician, heal thyself first. Don't start telling someone else a lot of metaphysical truths or cliches until in a measure you can demonstrate them. First, awaken yourself to the point of realization, so that when you are confronted with a problem, you can say to it, oh, carnal mind, and turn over and go to sleep. Because having said carnal mind, you've said the arm of flesh or nothingness. You haven't said carnal mind, now how shall I destroy it? You haven't said, oh, disease is an illusion, how shall I get rid of the illusion? Oh no, you have done what you would do on the desert after you have realized this isn't water up ahead, this is a mirage. You don't turn around and say, well, now I must get a pail and get rid of the mirage. No, while it was water, you may have thought of getting pails. But once you have perceived that it is mirage, you start your car and go forward. Because you're not afraid of a mirage. You were only afraid of water on the road, but not of mirage. So in your metaphysical practice, you will never be afraid of any case of any nature that has lasted for any duration, once you have stopped the habit of treating it as if it were a disease, and then saying, well, now I'm young in this, I could take a cold and heal it, but a cancer, I haven't enough understanding. Well, you haven't enough understanding to treat a pimple. If you are going to treat a disease, go out and get yourself a diploma from a medical school and get a license to practice, but don't undertake without the benefit, as we do, without the benefit of a legal license. Don't attempt to heal anyone of a cold. It may develop into pneumonia and you'll be pretty sorry. We are not healers of disease. One of the very first principles in this work that revealed itself to me in the form of an inner illumination was this: you cannot meet a problem on the level of a problem. Now, this has been my shibboleth from way back in 1932. You cannot meet a problem on the level of a problem. So, if somebody comes to you with a disease, no, let's start with an easier one. Someone comes to you or phones to you from the desert that they have a claim of water on the road. If you believe that you can help them remove water from the road, the blind leading the blind, when you can turn from the sight of water on the road and realize, no, I'll never meet it that way. And now, Father, how will I meet it? And then comes the answer, that's a mirage. Oh, and then you say to your friend, drive on, you're healed. The water's removed. If you try to treat a cold as a cold, you'll find it'll get the best of you. Once you can realize, in spite of Miss Stein, who says that a rose is a rose is a rose, don't you believe that a cold is a cold is a cold? A cold is a belief in two powers, that there is God and another power. And once you have realized that and said to it, that's the arm of flesh, you haven't treated it as a cold, you've treated it as the arm of flesh, or nothingness. Then there's one of my Hebrews who I like, Mr. Hezekiah. Now you can rest in that word. Rest in that word. The enemy, with all their strength, the arm of flesh. And as long as we have the Lord God, we have omnipotence. So we have no worry about the arm of flesh. We have no worry about temporal power. When you are confronted with fevers, oh, don't try to reduce them. Don't ask the patient an hour later, has it come down any? You need a medical license. A fever isn't a fever. It is a temptation to you to believe in two powers. It is a temptation to believe that God isn't the substance of all form. It is a temptation to believe that God isn't omnipotence, that there is some power now that you're going to call on God to do something to. When someone calls for help on supply, above all things, don't try to get it for them. The problem isn't supply, the problem isn't lack. The Master answered that. Man shall not live by bread alone. So when someone wants supply, say, I'm not interested in getting it for you, because man doesn't live by supply alone. What does he live by? Every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Oh, well, now let's forget supply and let's forget lack. Let's find some word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God, and pretty soon we'll hear, Son, thou art ever with me. All that I have is thine. Before Abraham was, I was with you, and I'll be with you to the end of the world. I will never leave you nor forsake you. And then you can rest in that word. You don't have to worry about supply. You have the assurance of God's presence. And the assurance of God's presence is far greater than all the supply that ever was laid up in storehouses. You see, until you begin to understand that in the infinite way we know nothing about reducing fevers or growths, we know nothing about removing growths, we know nothing about polio, not a thing. It was only because I'm so sure of this principle, I ought to be after 30 years, but it is only because of that I undertook a few years ago to show in England that we could heal mongoloid babies. And we have 3 of them we have 3 of them in school. Children that couldn't walk, children that couldn't think. 3 of them in school. There's no such thing as a claim that cannot be met if you rightly understand these principles, not because you memorize them. Don't forget, I'm not a believer in memorizing. Learn the substance of this and then develop your consciousness with it. Even if you have to start with just headaches or colds or pimples, and as your own depth of consciousness evolves, you'll find that you have no fear when the major problems of life touch you. And now we're going to have a rest.